Good morning, class. Today we're talking about subtraction in other bases. Today you're just going to be taking the notes, keeping in mind that I'll be back in class tomorrow, so any questions that you have, I'll be able to hopefully clear things up for you tomorrow if you're not quite sure what we're doing with these today. If that's the case, then please write down or think about, jotting down a reminder of what kind of questions you might have so that we can have productive time tomorrow getting those clarified so that you'll be able to practice some of these subtraction problems. So let's get started. This first example, we're looking at subtraction in base 5. It is very similar to subtraction in base 10 in that if the bottom number can be subtracted from the top number, then we simply do that. If it is not enough, then we're going to be borrowing from the next column over. The borrowing is where things get a little bit different though. So in this first example, if we look at this, the first example we have 3032 in base 5 and we're subtracting 1004 in base 5. So in our first column that we look at subtracting, we cannot subtract 4 from 2, so we're going to borrow from the 3 in the next column. So that 3 will become a 2. Now here's where it's different. The 2, we don't put a 1 in front like we do when we borrow in base 10. What we're borrowing is the base itself. So we're borrowing a group of 5, which means that this 2 is going to become a 7. So now my subtraction in that column is 7 minus 4, which is 3. 2 minus 0, which is 2, 0 minus 0, which is 0, and then 3 minus 1, which gives me 2. And again, we always want to write in whatever base it is we're working in. So 2, 0, 2, 3 in base 5 is our final answer. So back to that borrowing scenario, if we look at that, what we're really doing is borrowing the base. So the 2 that's in that column, what we're adding to it is the base itself. We're borrowing one of the bases. And that's where I got the 7 that ended up here. Okay, so if we look at this next example, 2130 in base 5, and we're subtracting 1234 in base 5. Again, in that first column, we don't have enough in the top to subtract the 4 from the bottom, so we're going to borrow. So the 3 becomes a 2. Now the 0 is going to become a 5. So now I have 5 minus 4, which just gives me 1. When I move into the next column, I can't subtract 3 from 2, so I have to borrow again. The 2 becomes a 0. The 1 becomes a 0, and the 2 is going to become a 7. So now again, I have 7 minus 3, which gives me 4. Moving to the next column, again, I can't subtract 2 from 0, so I have to borrow again. So the 2 becomes a 1, and the 0 becomes a 5. So 5 then minus 2 gives me 3, and 1 minus 1 would just be 0, so we don't write in that column. So 341 in base 5 is my final answer. So let's look at this last one while we're going on this. If we look at this last example, what we have here is 4321 in base 5, and we're subtracting 442 in base 5. So again, looking at that first column, we can't subtract 2 from 1, so we're borrowing. The 2 becomes a 1, and the 1 in the first column becomes a 6. Now 6 minus 2 gives me 4. Can I subtract 4 from 1? I cannot. So the 3 is going to become a 2, and this 1 becomes a 6. Now we have 6 minus 4. That works, we get 2. Moving to the next column, I can't subtract 4 from 2 again, so this 4 is going to become a 3. This 2 becomes a 7. 7 minus 4 gives me 3, and in the last column, 3, and I'm not subtracting anything, so it just comes down. So 3324 in base 5 would be our final answer there. Again, please don't let this give you any anxiety. I'll be back in class tomorrow to help out some more. So today, just see if you can follow along, see if you can start getting the routine of how this goes, and then I'll be back in class tomorrow to help you with any questions you might have. So let's look at another example. Now we're going to look at subtraction in base 12. So this one gets even a little more tricky, right? Because in base 12, we have letters. So keep in mind what your letters represent. Okay, and so what we're going to look at here, let me really quickly get this so that you guys will be able to see this a little better. So if we look at this first example in example 7, we have 8-2b in base 12, and we're subtracting 3a6 in base 12. Okay, if we look at this, again, keep in mind we know that a is equal to 10. We know that b is equal to 11 in base 12. So b is really 11. So a lot of times I'll write that to myself because now I know b is 11. 11 minus 6, we can do that subtraction. So 11 minus 6 is just 5. Excuse me. Now, can I subtract 10 from 2? I cannot. So this 8 is going to become a 7. This 2 is going to become a 14. Again, I borrowed the base, so 12 gets added to whatever number is there. So now can I subtract 10 from 14? I can, right? This A really represents 10. So if that helps you to think about it written in there instead of the A, then certainly think that way. So 14 minus 10 gives me 4, and then 7 minus 3 gives me 4, and again I'm working in base 12. Okay? This next one is nice. There's no borrowing involved. Okay, so in our 7b, 7 base 12, we're subtracting 3, 4, 7 base 12. Here we don't have to borrow. In our first column, 7 minus 7 is just 0. B, which really represents 11. 11 minus 4, excuse me, is 7. And then 7 minus 3 is 4. So we have 4, 7, 0 in base 12. That one was a little easier, right? Should have started with that one. Now if we look at this last one in base 12, again, it might be helpful to rewrite that B is really 11, A is really 10. If that helps you to have those notations in there, then by all means do that. Okay, so now what I have is 11 minus 5. 11 minus 5 is just 6. If we look at the next column over, I can't subtract 9 from 7. So I'm going to borrow. So this 10 is going to become a 9. This 7 becomes 19. So now I have 19 minus 9, which is 10. Remember that 10 is really A. That's what we use to represent it in base 12. And now 9, I'm not subtracting anything in the last column. So my final answer here would be 9A6 in base 12. Doesn't seem so bad, right? In example 8, we're going to look at a little bit more of examples in various different bases, so they're not all the same this time. Again, you want to keep in mind things like when we get to this example with base 16, think about what all of the letters represent. Okay, and so remember that A is 10, B is 11, C is 12, D is 13, E is 14, and F is 15. So when we get to that base 16 question, just keep those things in mind. Okay, we're going to look at this first one where we're looking in base 7. Okay, so if we're looking at this example in base 7, starts out, I don't have to borrow. 2 minus 1, just 1. 3 minus 2, just 1. Now I have 0 minus 3, and I can't do that subtraction, so I'm borrowing. So the 4 becomes a 3. The 0 in this case becomes a 7, because that's the base I'm working in. So now 7 minus 3 gives me 4, and the 3 gets brought down. It doesn't have anything to subtract. So 3, 4, 1, 1 in base 7. Kind of getting the hang of it? We have to pay attention to whatever base we're working in so that we don't subtract or add the wrong thing when we're borrowing. So now if we look at this example in base 2, again, we get to start off with no borrowing. So 1 minus 1 just gives me 0. However, when we get to this next one, 0 minus 0, still doing okay. When we get to 0 minus 1, now we have to borrow. So the 1 becomes a 0, the 0 becomes a 2. Okay, now 2 minus 1 just gives me 1 in base 2. It's possible in a situation like this, it's possible that we might have to borrow from a couple places over. So if we hopefully won't hit any of those until I'm back with you tomorrow and I can go through some of those types of problems. Okay, so let's look at this last one on this first row. So 3, 2, 4 in base 6, and we're subtracting 1, 4, 2 in base 6. Okay, so 4 minus 2, that just gives me 2. Then we have 2 minus 4, so I can't do that. I've got to borrow. The 3 becomes a 2. The 2 becomes an 8. Again, we're borrowing the base of 6. So 6 gets added to 2. That's where I got the 8. Now 8 minus 4, that gives me 4. And then 2 minus 1, that's just 1, all still in base 6. Not so bad, right? Okay, let's look at this final row for subtraction. Okay, so we've got 1, 7, 1, 3 in base 8. We're subtracting 1, 2, 4, 3 in base 8. So 3 minus 3 gives me 0. So again, 3 minus 3 is going to give me 0. 4 can't be subtracted from 1. So now I'm borrowing from the next column over. So the 7 is going to become a 6. The 1 becomes 9. 9 minus 4 gives me 5. 6 minus 2 gives me 4. And again, I'm working in base 8. 1 minus 1 on the end would have given me 0. Not so bad? So all of this addition, all of this subtraction, it's going to help us leading into the multiplication, into the division that we'll talk about a little bit later. But keep in mind that we're going to keep working at this and make sure that we are all on board knowing what it is that we're working through. So now in this next example, we're working in base 16. So again, it might be helpful to have jotted down to yourself that A is 10, B is 11, C is 12, D is 13, E is 14, and F is really 15. So it might be helpful to have those numbers jotted down simply so that when I'm having to think my way through this, if I do some subtraction and it would end up to be 13, I need to know that I write the D in that place. So if we have here 4 minus 3, that gives us 1. I can't subtract 10 from 6, so I'm going to need to borrow. So this F, which is 15, is going to become a 14. And now I'm borrowing 16, so that means this 6 becomes a 22. So 22 minus 10 gives me 12. But again, remember that 12 is represented by C. Okay, and then in the last column, 14 minus 2 again is giving me 12. So again, remember that that's represented by C, and this is in base 16. Not so bad, right? Hopefully you'll feel that way after you get some practice of these done. And you'll be happy because once you're done with this lesson, you get to practice more addition, which you all are very good at. So the subtraction will come. If you're not feeling like you understand it yet, it'll come. Okay, last example for subtraction. Again, now we're working in base 9, so keep track of what it is that we're borrowing if we have to borrow. So 3 minus 1 gives me 2. I can't subtract 4 from 5, so I'm going to have to borrow. The 5 becomes a 4. The 4 becomes 13. 13 minus 5 gives me 8, and 4 minus 2 gives me 2. All of that in base 9. So again, it's just working through a few examples getting you used to the idea of it. Tomorrow when I get back to class, we will certainly go through some more of these examples and look at some that you guys can practice as we go along. So hopefully this is starting to click. If it's not, again, don't stress too much. I'll be back tomorrow and we'll work on some more of these together tomorrow. For the rest of the class period, you guys will be working on a review assignment of some conversions. So again, that chart in your notes, that's going to be helpful for the conversions. And then some addition, which again, you guys have been practicing and you're doing very well with. So continue that, continue practicing those. If you finish the review worksheet before the end of class, please think about if there's anything else that you're missing for me, and get caught up on anything like that, just so that you are working and not making subs crazy with having nothing to do. I'm pretty sure that we all have something we could be working on. If it's not for my class, then maybe something for another class. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.